Zombie apocalypse. It's a term and a setting we're all familiar with from something, somewhere. It could be the wacky black comedy hijinks of Zombieland or Shaun of the Dead, the grim fatalism of 28 Days Later, or the over-the-top action of Left 4 Dead or Dead Rising. The zombie apocalypse is a cultural icon so prevalent that the US government has a military strategic doctrine prepped in the event of an attack by the undead. Seriously, Plan 8888 was made to train junior officers at the Department of Defense, and while it wasn't made with the intention of it being put into use, the existence of the plan at all is a testament to just how iconic the enduring image of the zombie is in our modern culture. One of the biggest contributors to the zombie being such a cultural icon is The Walking Dead, the long-running AMC TV show based on the comic book by Robert Kirkman. The story follows the Kentucky sheriff Rick Grimes trying to navigate the remains of the US that's rotted into a lawless world of the undead, alongside or against the misfits and wanderers he meets along the way. While the original book was pretty successful by all accounts, the TV series absolutely exploded, and before long it was talked about in the same breath as Game of Thrones, Broadchurch and Breaking Bad, as a signifier that television drama had peaked in the early 2010s. The main show ran for 177 episodes across 11 seasons, and spawned a horde of spin-offs and tie-in materials, but despite, or perhaps because of AMC spinning the series out so much, its relevance inevitably started to decline, and while new Walking Dead media is still being made today, it hardly ever gets the same level of attention and recognition as the show did during its heyday. So when a string of hints, leaks and marketing teasers built up the official reveal of The Walking Dead coming Dead by Daylight, I don't think the community really knew how to react to this one. For some people it was a dream come true, just what they'd always wanted for the game, but for others it felt so odd. A show that had such a dominance in the public consciousness just a few years ago that only made its fall into obscurity that much more conspicuous. To many players, The Walking Dead is a series well past its prime, still shambling on long after its natural expiration date. But how did this affect the chapter itself? Today we'll be looking at the stories of Rick and Michonne Grimes, and how they were wrapped into the world of the entity through the lore and other elements designed to make their arrival into the fog as natural and seamless as possible. Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers, to The Walking Dead by Daylight. Nah, I don't think I like that. Hi, I just wanted to get this out here quickly because this video is probably more positive than you'd think when you clicked on a video that had anything to do with The Walking Dead's DBD release. I just want to make something completely clear here, that my appreciation for what this chapter did for the characters of The Walking Dead exists in isolation of the actual quality of the patch, because fuck, this patch is atrocious. You don't need me to tell you that. This patch is so comprehensively fucked in so many different ways. I've spent my week instead just playing Minecraft, building a sculpture of loss in my friend's house out of obsidian so they can't get rid of it without spending like 10 hours mining away at the blocks. Hell, I even considered not putting this video out at all, even though it was almost done, because I was so disappointed in the current directions the game is taking that I was in two minds about saying anything positive about the game right now. But my lore videos tend to age pretty well in terms of views, and a lot of people kind of come back to these sorts of videos after a long time. I didn't want Walking Dead missing from my catalogue. And also, I don't think I'm quite as pissed as a lot of people are about this patch, because my standards are just a bit lower. It's like, wow, loads of bugs that massively affect everything about the game, and the devs kind of putting their fingers in their ears and not really fixing the problems. Like, you know what that's like? Try being a Twins player for 5 years. Twins will be 5 years old at the end of the year. They've got some bugs that have been around since their PTB. Some of these bugs are old enough to attend preschool. At least for me, Dead by Daylight being an unbalanced buggy mess staffed by devs who don't seem to understand how to address the problems they've created, this has been my reality for quite some time now. The Walking Dead is just another bump on a very rough road. But yeah, this is kind of beside the point, kind of the topic of its own video that will be coming soon, don't you worry. But yeah, I just wanted to get this out of the way that I appreciate the lore and character work that the Walking Dead chapter brings to Dead by Daylight, but that does not mean patch 9.1.0 that it arrived in is anything other than a disaster. I just know that the lore and the character work and all the stuff surrounding it will outlast all these bugs and issues. Or at least I really really hope it does. The two survivors recently added in the mid-chapter patch, Rick and Michonne Grimes, are the Walking Dead representatives in Dead by Daylight. Yes, I do know that Daryl's a skin, and that's awesome, but he's not written into the game in any meaningful way, and is ultimately just an accessory to be bought once you've already purchased Rick. The DBD collaboration is explicitly taken from the AMC show instead of the Kirkman comic run, which genuinely changes a lot since the show writers took a lot of creative liberties with Kirkman's work. As you might expect from a show that has 11 seasons and more spin-offs than you can shake a sword at, Rick and Michonne Grimes both have a hell of a lot of story to catch up on if you're not familiar with The Walking Dead, or only watched the early seasons like many people did. I'm not going to try and recap the 9 seasons of show that take place between Rick waking up from that coma and the events of the DBD lore, but I am going to give as much context as I can while we go into Rick and Michonne's DBD lore to help anybody who hasn't seen the show. Rick Grimes' story in DBD starts at the same point as The Walking Dead Season 1, with Rick waking up in hospital from a coma to find a world gone to hell. Society has more or less completely collapsed as the dead walk the streets, and Rick wastes no time as he sets out to find his wife Lori and son Carl, who he eventually tracks down to a survivors camp in Atlanta. Over the years that follow, a group quickly coalesces around Rick due to his natural leadership skills, growing sometimes as newcomers join up, and other times shrinking as his companions, and eventually wife and son, all meet grisly ends. In Season 3, the group comes into conflict with the fortified town of Woodbury, led by the authoritarian governor. Enter Michonne Hawthorne, a former captive of the governor who threatened his leadership and is found on the run and wounded by Rick and Carl, who save her life and help nurse her back to health. Michonne has not had an easy run of things before crossing paths with the governor. After losing her boyfriend and son at the start of the outbreak, she wandered the world in solitude, and as such her integration into the group was not the smoothest. She was prickly and kind of cold to the group for a time, but she warmed up quickly enough and her alliance with Rick turned to love and eventually marriage. After several seasons of bloodshed and violence, the group eventually settles down in the Alexandria safe zone, where Rick and Michonne take positions of leadership. 18 months after their new lives in Alexandria begin, during the events of the Season 9 episode What Comes After, Dead by Daylight's lore picks them up. The citizens of Alexandria are under attack by a huge swarm of walkers, and Rick blows up a bridge to stop the approaching swarm of undead. The explosion engulfs him, and a heartbroken Michonne believes Rick to be dead. In the main series, his injured but still living body is taken away by the Civil Republic of Philadelphia, which leads on to the events of the Ones Who Live spin-off. But in DBD's canonicity, the Entity gets to him first, and Rick is taken into the fog. After the bridge explosion, The Walking Dead undergoes a 6-year time skip, in which Michonne comes to terms with Rick's death, and raises their adoptive daughter Judith as well as their son RJ, who was born shortly after Rick disappeared. In the main show, Michonne has resigned herself to Rick's death by the end of the 6-year time skip, and it takes a full season of exploring for her to realise that Rick is still alive, and begin her search for him. But in the DBD continuity, it's a little less clear when she decides to go off on her own. In the story, it says she couldn't shake the feeling that Rick was still out there, but that could have been shortly after Rick's death in Season 9, or as late as her departure from the story in Season 10. All we know is it was after RJ was born. Her default outfit in DBD is most similar to her look in Season 9 with the bandana thing on her head, so that's what I'm going to go with, but I might be wrong, you never know with these sorts of things. So Michonne gives birth to her son RJ, but goes out to look for Rick shortly afterwards, before Alexandria fully isolates itself and she becomes more jaded and cynical about Rick's fate. She hears his voice out there in the woods somewhere, calling out weakly, and this takes her to some sort of tunnel or burrow. Leaving her sword behind, she clambers in and follows his voice, so far and so dark and so deep, until she emerges at the campfire. And thus the Entity claims first Rick and then Michonne Grimes for its own. At a baseline level, Rick and Michonne's lore is not too dissimilar to most licensed lore in Dead by Daylight. The character's life goes normally for a bit, just like in the source material, and the Entity takes them about halfway through or towards the end. For most of our licensed characters, that's about as much as we get, and The Walking Dead isn't too different from that. But I think there's definitely some details about Rick and Michonne's inclusion that are worth talking about, and this just makes me feel better about it than a normal licensed integration. First things first, we're getting 2 survivors together this time. That doesn't normally happen. We've only ever seen it before with Stranger Things and Resident Evil. These 2 chapters aren't integrated particularly smoothly into DBD. The Stranger Things lore is so vague it's almost completely meaningless, and the Resident Evil DBD lore is so short you could almost tweet it. So the precedent for licensed chapters with multiple survivors is not great. But in my opinion, The Walking Dead handles its duo of survivors much more effectively. Not just because of the length or the depth, but because of how the stories approach time and continuity. Stranger Things lore has to be some of the worst licensed lore we've ever had, just because there's so little there. We don't even know when in the timeline Steve and Nancy were taken by the entity, or if the Demogorgon that we play in the game as a killer is the one from the first season, or just a random other Demogorgon that got scooped up for the trials. We're given shit-for-dick context about anything that happens in the entire chapter, presumably because Netflix didn't care enough to find a good point worth taking the characters from. Resident Evil does have context, but between the 6 playable characters in DBD, the context is very disjointed because none of the disappearances acknowledge each other in any way. Let's look at Jill, for example. She vanishes in the middle of the events of RE3, but Jill also appears in RE5 as a pretty important part of the plot. Wesker is the main antagonist of RE5, and his DBD lore takes place towards the end of that game, so you'd think that Jill being missing since RE3 would play into that it would come up somewhere. But it doesn't. Same thing with Leon and Ada's DBD lore. Ada is taken just before the events of RE4, but her lore does not acknowledge the fact that Leon disappeared halfway through RE2. This isn't really a canonicity problem per se, because it's reasonable to assume that each character is just taken from a different universe than all the others, so the timelines don't snarl in any way, but it makes all the characters feel isolated from each other in a way that they're just not in their source material. Imagine if, when Wesker's chapter dropped, Wesker, Ada and Rebecca's stories were changed to reflect the fact that the entity had already taken Jill, Leon and Nemesis. That would have been a really nice way of marking DBD's RE characters as our own takes on them, and let us explore new possibilities for interesting storytelling. Like, if Leon's gone, what does the US government do about Ashley Graham? If Jill's gone, who provides the information needed to defeat Wesker at the end of RE5? But no. Capcom behaviour clearly didn't value that sense of continuity, so all the RE stories felt disconnected, especially once the second chapter dropped. Rick and Michonne, however, do have that sense of shared continuity. Rick is taken into the fog before Michonne, and Rick's appearance affects Michonne in a way that feels organic and authentic to the source material. After all, Rick does disappear in Season 9 of the show, and it does traumatise and harden Michonne for years going forwards. Dead by Daylight just offers an alternate explanation for that disappearance. It makes Rick, and especially Michonne's integration to DBD, feel silky smooth, without really doing anything special. You just pick the perfect time for Rick and Michonne to get taken, without any sort of continuity screw that takes you out of the narrative experience. And that's continued in the chapter's marketing material as well, because unlike most licensed chapters, we actually do have some pre-written marketing material for Rick and Michonne. Just before the PTB dropped, 2 letters were shown off by behaviour on social media. One from Rick, labelled for Michonne, and vice versa with the other. Both letters talk about their experiences in the trials and are presumably left at the campfire between trials in the hope it will reach the other one. And this gives a valuable window into the trials that we don't see very often. Much like the base bios lining up in the continuity properly, there's nothing particularly groundbreaking here. It's not like we don't know what happens in the trials, but it's a level of effort taken to integrate these characters into DBD's universe that's kind of unheard of in most licensed DLCs, especially after some of the more recent ones like Castlevania, Tokyo Ghoul and FNAF. And it gets even better if you read those letters having watched the show, because these letters read exactly like the reflections of those characters who wrote them. Rick's letter to Michonne specifically talks about the people that he met in the trials, personally recalling their names and reflecting on their experiences before the fog, which makes sense because he's a leader, a people person, who listens to his emotions and to other people a lot, and wears a sentimentality and attachment to them on his sleeve. Michonne's writing, on the other hand, uses more visceral and combative language, talking about her struggle to survive the trials and praising Rick's example of leadership as a model to follow in these tough times. Michonne's letter is tough, and Rick's letter is caring. And those 2 characters at that point in the story are comfortably defined by those respective traits. If you're a Rick and Michonne fan, I guarantee you will fuck with this depiction heavy, and it's important to reiterate that they did not need to do this. Recent chapters have not had marketing material like this, especially the licensed ones, and especially done with this much care and respect to the characters. but it's the little details like this that make a chapter feel complete, and make DBD's guest characters feel a little more welcome. The marketing material and lore for the chapter highlights Rick's caring and selfless nature, and Michonne's rugged toughness, and that characterization of both of them is continued in the Survivor's in-game portrayal too. Survivors with voice lines are slowly become the new standard, especially for solo Survivor releases, and The Walking Dead is no exception. And this time we got the original VAs back too, for the most part. Andrew Lincoln is here, lending his voice once again to Ricky Dicky Doo Dar Grimes, and Norman Reedus is back voicing Daryl for the legendary skin for him. But Dana Guerra unfortunately didn't end up being our voice actress for Michonne, although we did still get her likeness for the model. In any case, both the voice acting and the written lines themselves feel super authentic to the source material and the characters of The Walking Dead, especially the cooperative voice lines that play when Rick and Michonne interact in the trials together. The models and cosmetics are similarly authentic. Every skin choice for Rick and Michonne comes from a specific episode or period of the show, and the face models and portraits for the chapter perfectly resemble the actors' likenesses, especially Michonne. Hell, even the perk designs reflect the characters really well. Rick's perks emphasize leadership, self-sacrifice, resourcefulness, and thinking on your feet, while Michonne's are more physical and combative as they showcase her resilience and strength. It's all just so cohesive and consistent. That's how you capture the essence of these characters down to the letter in DBD, both in the big sweeping broad strokes and in the finer details too. I've been saying for a while that solo Survivors have consistently been the best releases in the recent years of DBD. Ash, Michaela, Nick Cage, Alan Wake and Orella were all exceptional releases that brought us fun, charming characters and made them feel like authentic parts of Dead by Daylight's world. And now Rick and Michonne can be added to that illustrious list. Every solo Survivor released ever has pushed forward what it means to be a Survivor in Dead by Daylight by showing us something we hadn't seen before. Ash introduced voice lines and actor likenesses for the first time in DBD characters. Michaela introduced the Boon Totem mechanic for the first time. Nick Cage is, well, a real person whose perks brought a level of RNG and quirky effects we'd never seen before or since. Alan Wake brought the Remedy writers into Behavior's offices to make the smoothest license integration we've ever seen from a narrative perspective. And Orella was a landmark in LGBT representation for DBD to be our first character who debuted as part of the community, rather than being retroactively written into it. All of these survivors did something remarkable, something first or best that stands out among the Survivor roster, and Rick and Michonne represent a meaningful first as well. They're our first survivors to interact with each other in the trials themselves. Talita and Renato and the Resident Evil characters will banter to each other in the lobby, but Rick, Michonne and even the skin Daryl interact with each other when they're healing, unhooking each other or even just missing skill checks. It makes this release feel genuinely special, the kind of thing we'll hopefully see more of in the future as survivors get integrated more and more completely into the game. Don't get me wrong, there is a lot wrong with this actual release. Patch 9.1.0 sucks for so many reasons. Many of the balance decisions this patch have been just baffling, to put it simply. The game has a level of bugginess I haven't seen since the original Resident Evil chapter when the game was unplayable on console. Lobbies are crashing constantly. The Fallen Refuge map has the most broken 3-gen the game has ever seen. And, these voice lines I was talking so highly of. In one of Michonne's voice lines, you can hear the director, or whoever it is, speaking in the background after the line is finished. That's just a bit embarrassing. Although, who am I to judge about accidentally leaving microphone flubs in the videos that I should have edited out? I'll make no bones about it. Playing on this patch sucks. But balance problems, bugs, those atrocious gen spreads on Fallen Refuge, and whatever nightmares Conviction's going to unleash upon the fog, these are things that can and will change. Bugs get fixed, balance gets updated, gen spawns get adjusted, but it's the character stuff, the lore and the visual design and the voice lines, the vibes of this release. That'll be the stuff that'll be a part of this game forever. And in these regards, The Walking Dead is nothing short of excellent. To be clear, I'm not a huge Walking Dead fan. I enjoyed the bits of the show that I watched, but it's not near and dear to my heart in the way that it is to a lot of people. But with how well this chapter is integrated, I genuinely wish I was. The Walking Dead chapter does not put a foot wrong in terms of art and character representation, and I can't conceive of the mind of a Walking Dead fan who isn't satisfied with that. Well, maybe I can, because there's one conspicuous absence from the Walking Dead chapter, and that's a killer. It's wild, isn't it? The Walking Dead is one of the best known horror IPs in the world right now, with over 200 episodes within the 11 seasons of the main show and its oodles of spin-offs, and yet we didn't get a killer for it. Isn't that peculiar? With a series so long and beloved as The Walking Dead, there must have been some conversations around behaviour about adding a killer to the chapter. I'm sure some fans though jumped on the opportunity. Negan in particular is a candidate that jumps out of the list of Walking Dead characters who could have been a popular killer, so why didn't we get one? For one thing, Springtrap's existence demanded a solo survivor release in the mid-chapter, and there was nothing that would have made them budge from the FNAF release. But to be honest, I don't feel like Negan as a killer would have done much to improve the chapter anyway. Or any other Walking Dead killer for that matter. And the secret as to why is what makes Walking Dead stand out from the other zombie apocalypse settings. A zombie apocalypse is a common trope to the point of being cliché, so a zombie apocalypse setting has to have something special to set it apart from the others if it wants to be memorable. Shaun of the Dead, for example, has that irreverent Britishness to it, that pairs dry humour and some fun characters alongside some serious heart. 28 Days Later and its sequels prefer to take a super grounded and realistic approach, engages heavily with the science behind the outbreak and the symptoms the rage virus inflicts on its victims. The Walking Dead does things a little bit differently again. It's not a sci-fi show or a black comedy. It's a bloody and violent long-form soap opera, where the relationship between the cast members is the driving force behind everything in that story. When the original comic book was being written, Kirkman specifically chose to remain vague about the mechanics of the outbreak and how it all works, so that he could focus on tight, character-based storytelling. And while the show does expand on it quite a bit, it takes its sweet time to do it, because the primary focus is on Rick and the circle of characters around him. Fittingly, the threats they encounter aren't so much the walkers as the leftovers of the society the walkers have destroyed. Characters like Negan and the Governor are only in the positions that they are in to harm our protagonists because of the social destruction inflicted by the end of the world as we know it. Their role as antagonists and monsters hinges entirely on the world they're a part of allowing them to fill that role, which means that when they're removed from that role, their capacity to be a villain is reduced. Look at Negan. When he's removed from leadership of the Saviours, his role as a villain basically stops dead. He has more redeeming moments, he's imprisoned, meaning he's less violent, and he slowly starts to earn, if not forgiveness, then at least a level of trust from some of the other characters. Adding a Walking Dead killer to DBD would be missing the point of Walking Dead's villains. It would require removing them from the world they are suited to drop them into DBD's context, and that would rob them of all their menace. Everything that makes them memorable would be gone. Without the Saviours at his back, what makes Negan any more threatening than Rick, Michonne, or Daryl? A solo survivor release was perfect because it allows us to engage with the stuff that makes Walking Dead matter, its central characters and the relationships they cultivate over the years of survival, without having to engage with its relatively generic zombie apocalypse world. I'm not saying a killer couldn't have worked, they probably could have pulled it off, but I don't think it would have made the chapter meaningfully better. Rick and Michonne are fantastic, just the way they are. Truthfully, The Walking Dead is a release I think I'm going to remember very fondly over time, in the middle of one of DBD's buggiest patches ever. But bugs get fixed, fucked up gen spawns get spread out, clown numbers get adjusted again, and Conviction hopefully gets hit with a fucking sledgehammer. The state of the game changes all the time, and we're going through a rough spot right now. I'm not going to pretend we're not. But hopefully things will brighten up soon, and when they do, I think The Walking Dead will age masterfully. We already know that a Maggie legendary skin with the voice and likeness of Lauren Cohen is in the pipeline, and I wouldn't be surprised if we got more in the future. Glenn, Carol, or even Negan wouldn't surprise me as eventual legendaries in the event the chapter does well. I said before, not a big Walking Dead guy. I like it, but I don't love it. And the DBD chapter isn't going to make me fall in love with The Walking Dead. Alan Wake is still the only chapter good enough so far to turn me into a fan. But I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that not only is the Walking Dead release good, but I genuinely really like it. And that is a far higher bar to clear. DBD has plenty of good chapters that I still didn't care enough about to like them. FNAF, Tokyo Ghoul and Castlevania were all at least decent chapters, but I can't really look back on them and say that I like them, because they don't really have anything to offer that I value. But The Walking Dead represents a further step forward for high quality solo survivor releases. The last year or so has been defined almost entirely by licensed content. D&D, Tomb Raider, Castlevania, Tokyo Ghoul, FNAF, and that's not even including the licensed cosmetics like The Witcher, Junji Ito and Dragula. These releases were mostly all broadcasted or leaked well ahead of time. We all knew what was coming, and that dragged my motivation down over the year, because I knew there was just nothing for me to look forward to. But in just a few weeks, we'll get an exciting new original chapter. After that, a mystery license that marks our last licensed chapter for at least 9 months. Knowing about FNAF a full year in advance made its arrival feel very final, and that made the Walking Dead release feel kind of like an epilogue to that. It's the end of an era defined by licensed hype machines, and the beginning of a new era of DBD, as the game approaches its 10th anniversary. I'm not going to pretend the first few steps on this journey haven't been a bit of a bumpy ride, but you know what? I'm still here for that journey. And if it's going to include characters as well realised as Rick and Michonne Grimes, it's a trip I'm definitely looking forward to.